Traveling videos. I got my Halloween decorations, y'all. Y'all want to see it? Now y'all gotta prepare yourself. It's real creepy. Y'all know I be into all that. You know what I'm saying? It's real creepy. Not. It's beautiful, isn't it? I had to buy this separate. They had some kind of little water fountain bowl sitting on it. This is supposed to hang here. So I had a hook on it like that, but it didn't have a plastic. It just had the hook. It was hanging on display. And that's what I got for all these people with this skeletons and monsters and crazy looking stuff. It was from a Mexico art store. This stuff was imported from Mexico. So it blends in perfectly with my old Mex farm and mythology reads and my spirituality. A lot of people got all that goblins and witches and skeletons and monsters and a lot of demonic stuff. And I was like, well, so some of these people are my favorite fans and they always ride by here with their little weird activity and hand gestures. I said, let me put some artwork that represents me to balance out and nullify all of those little hand gestures and crazy comments they make. I think it was beautiful. Now, was it cheap? That's another story. But we'll get right into this mythology read. We're reading from Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales from Classic Stories. The story we're reading tonight is called The Shadow. This book is forwarded by Maria Tartar, Flame Tree Publishing. We're here on page 379. In very hot climates where the heat of the sun has great power, people are usually as brown as mahogany, and in the hottest countries they are Negroes with black skins. A learned man once traveled into one of these warm climates from the cold regions of the north and thought that he would roam about as he did at home, but he soon had to change his opinion. He found that, like all sensible people, he must remain in the house during the whole day, with every window and door closed so that it looked as if all the house were asleep or absent. The houses of the narrow street in which he lived were so lofty that the sun shone upon them from morning to evening, and it became quite unbearable. This learned man from the cold regions was young as well as clever, but it seemed to him as if we're sitting in an oven, and he became quite exhausted and weak. He grew so thin that the shadow shriveled up and became much smaller than it had been at home. The sun took away even what was left of it, and he saw nothing of it till the evening after sunset. It was really a pleasure, as soon as the lights were brought into the room, to see the shadow stretch itself against the wall, even to the ceiling, so tall it was, and really wanted a good stretch to recover its strength. The learned man would sometimes go out into the balcony to stretch himself also, and as soon as the stars came forth in the clear, beautiful sky, he felt revived. People at his hour began to make their appearance in all balconies in the street, for in the warm climates every window has a balcony in which they can breathe the fresh evening air, which is very necessary, even to those who are used to the heat that makes them as brown as mahogany, so that the street presented a very lively appearance. Here were shoemakers, tailors, and all sorts of people sitting. In the street beneath, they brought out tables and chairs, lighted the candles by hundreds, talked and sang, and were very merry. There were people walking, carriages driving, and mules trotting along, with their bells on their harnesses, tingle, tingle, as they went. Then the dead were carried to the grave with the sound of a solemn music and the tolling of the church bells. It was indeed a scene of a varied life in the street. One house only, which was just opposite to the one in which the foreign learned man lived, formed a contrast to all this, for it was quite still, and yet somebody dwelt there. For flowers stood in the balcony blooming beautifully in the hot sun, and this could not have been unless they had been watered carefully. Therefore, some of us must be in the house to do this. The doors leading to the balcony were half open in the evening, and although in front of the room all was dark, music could be heard from the interior of the house. The foreign learned man considered this music very delightful, but perhaps he fancied it, for everything in these warm countries pleased him, excepting the heat of the sun. The foreign landlord said he did not know who had taken the opposite house. Nobody was to be seen there. And as to the music, he thought it seemed very tedious, to him most uncommonly so. It is just as if someone was practicing a piece that he could not manage, and it always the same piece. He thinks, I suppose, that he will be able to manage it at last, but I do not think so, however long he may play it. Once the foreigner woke in the night, he slept with the door open, which led to the balcony. The wind had raised the curtain before it, and there appeared a wonderful brightness over all the balcony of the opposite house. The flowers seemed like flames of the most gorgeous colors, and among the flowers stood a beautiful slender maiden. It was to him if light streamed from her and dazzled his eyes, but then he had only just opened them. As he awoke from his sleep, with one spring he was out of bed and crept softly behind the curtain, but she was gone. The brightness had disappeared. The flowers no longer appeared like flames. Although still as beautiful as ever, the door stood ajar, and from the inner room sounded music so sweet and so lovely that it produced the most enchanting thoughts and acted on the senses with the magic power. Who could live there? Where was the real interest? For both in the street and in the lane at the side, the whole ground floor was continuous of shops, and the people could not always be passing through them. One evening the foreigner sat in the balcony. A light was burning in the room just behind him. It was quite natural, therefore, that his shadow should fall off the wall of the opposite house, so that as he sat amongst the flowers on his balcony, when he moved, his shadow moved also. I think my shadow is the only living thing to be seen opposite, said the learned man. See how pleasantly it sits among the flowers? The door is only ajar. The shadow ought to be clever enough to step in and look at about him, and then to come back and tell me what he has seen. You can make yourself useful in this way, said he jokingly. Be so good as to step in now, will you? And then he nodded to the shadow, and the shadow nodded in return. Now go, but don't stay away altogether. Then the foreigner stood up, and the shadow opposite balcony stood up also. The foreigner turned around, the shadow turned, and if anyone had observed, they might have seen it as straight into the half-open door of the opposite balcony, As they learned, man re-entered his own room and let the curtain fall. The next morning, he went out to take his coffee and read the newspapers. "How is this?" he exclaimed, and he stood in the sunshine. "I have lost my shadow. So it really did go away yesterday evening, and it has returned. This is very annoying." And it certainly did vex him, not so much because the shadow was gone, but because he knew there was a story of a man without a shadow. All the people at home in this country knew this story, and when he returned and related his own adventures, they would say it was an imitation, and he had no desire for such thing to be said of him. So he decided not to speak of it at all, which was very sensible determination. In the evening, he went out again on his balcony, taking care to place the light behind him, for he knew that the shadow always wants his master for a screen. But he could not entice him out. He made himself little, and he made himself tall, but there was no shadow, and no shadow came. He said, "Him, a him," but it was all useless. That was very vexatious. But in warm countries, everything grows very quickly, and after a week had passed, he saw to his great joy that a new shadow was growing from his feet when he walked into the sunshine, so that the root must have determined. The root had must remain. After 3 weeks, he had quite a respectable shadow, which during his return journey to the northern lands continued to grow. It became at last so large that he might very as well have spared half of it. When this learned man arrived at home, he wrote books about the true, the good, and the beautiful, which are to be found in this world. And so days and years passed, many, many years. One evening, as he sat in the study, a very gentle tap was heard at the door. "Come in," said he. But no one came. He opened the door, and there stood before him a man so remarkably thin that he felt seriously troubled at his appearance. He was, however, very well dressed and looked like a gentleman. "To whom do I have the honor of speaking?" said he. "Ah, I hope you will recognize me," said the elegant stranger. "I have gained so much that I have a body of flesh and clothes to wear. You never expected to see me in such condition. Do you not recognize your old shadow? Ah, you never expected that I should return to you again. All has been prosperous with me since I was with you last. I have become rich in every way, and were inclined to purchase my freedom from service. I could easily do so." And he as spoke, he rattled between his fingers a number of costly trinkets, which hung to thick gold watch chain he wore around his neck. Diamond rings sparkled on his fingers, and it was all real. "I cannot recover from my astonishment," said the learned man. "What does all this mean?" "Something rather unusual," said the shadow. "But are you yourself an uncommon man? And you know very well that I have followed you in your footsteps ever since your childhood. As soon as you found that I have traveled enough to be trusted alone, I went my own way, and I am now in the most brilliant circumstances. But I felt a kind of longing to see you once more before you die, and I wanted to see this place again, for this is always a clinging to the land of one's birth. I know that you have now another shadow. Do I owe you anything? If so, have the goodness to say what it is." "No? Is it really you?" said the learned man. "Well, this is the most remarkable. I never supposed it possible that a man's old shadow could become a human being." "Just tell me what I owe you," said the shadow, "for I do not like to be in the debt of any man." "How can you talk in that manner?" said the learned man. "What question of debt can there be between us? You are as free as anyone. I rejoice exceedingly to hear of your good fortune. Sit down, old friend, and tell me a little of how it happened, and what you saw in the house opposite to me while you were in those hot climates." "Yes, I will tell you all about it," said the shadow, sitting down. "But then you must promise me never to tell in this city, wherever you may meet me, that I have been your shadow. I am thinking of being married, for I have more than sufficient support, a family. Make yourself quite easy, said the learned man. I will not tell no one who really you are. Here is my hand, I promise. And the word is sufficient between a man and man. Between a man and a shadow, said the shadow, for he could not help saying so. He was dressed in a suit of very finest black cloth, polished boots, and an opera crust hat, which could be folded together so that nothing could be seen but the crown of the rim, besides the trinkets, the gold chain, and the diamond rings already spoken of. The shadow was in fact very well dressed, and this made a man of him. Now the polished leather boots as firmly this made the man of him. Now I will relate to you what you wish to know, said the shadow, placing his foot with the polished leather boots as firmly as possible on the arm of the new shadow of the learned man, which lay at his feet like a poodle dog. This was done. It might be from pride, or perhaps that a new shadow might cling to him. But prostrate shadow remained quiet and rested in order that it might listen, for it wanted to know how. For it wanted to know how a shadow could be sent away by its master and become a man itself. Do you know, said the shadow, that in the house opposite to you lived the most glorious creature in the world? It was poetry. It was poetry. You like the story, Raina? She got ahead, yeah. It's your bedtime story, baby. Poetry, exclaimed the learned man. Yes, she lives at a hermit in great cities. Poetry. Well, I saw her once for a very short moment. While sleep weighed down my eyelid, she flashed upon me from the balcony like a radiant aureole Boreas, surrounded with flowers like flames of fire. Tell me, you were on the balcony that evening. You went through the door, and what did you see? I found myself in a anteroom, said the shadow. You still sat opposite to me, looking into the room. There was no light, or at least it seemed in partial darkness, for the door of a whole suite of the room stood open, and they were brilliantly lighted. The blaze of light would have killed me had I approached too near the maiden myself, but I was cautious and took time, which was what everyone ought to do. And what dost thou see? Asked the learned man. I saw everything, as you should hear, but it really is no pride on my part as a free man in possessing the knowledge that I do. Besides, my opinion, not to speak of my wealth. I wish you would say you me instead of thou. I beg your pardon, said the learned man. It is an old habit which is difficult to break. You are quite right. I will try to think of it. But now tell me everything that you saw. Everything, said the shadow, for I saw and know everything. What was the appearance of the inner rooms? Asked the scholar. Was it there like a cool grove or like a holy temple? Were the chambers like a starry sky scene from the top of a high mountain? It was that you described, said the shadow, but I do not go quite in. I remain in the twilight of an anteroom, but I was in a very good position. I could see her. I could see and hear all that was going on of the court of poetry. But what did you see? Did the gods of ancient times pass through the rooms? Did the old heroes fight their battles over again? Were there lovely children at play? Who related their dreams? I tell you have been there, and therefore you may be sure that I have seen everything that was to be seen. If you had gone there, you should know that not have remained a human being, whereas I became one. and that at the same moment I became aware of my inner being, my inborn affinity to the nature of poetry. It is true, I did not think much about it while I was with you, but you will remember that I was always much larger at sunshine and sunset, and in the moonlight, even more visible than yourself. But I did not then understand my inner existence. In the ante room, it was revealed to me. I became a man. I came out in full maturity, but you had left my warm countries as a man. I felt ashamed to go about without boots or clothes, and that exterior finish by which a man is known, so I went my own way. I can tell you, for you will not put in a book. I hid myself under the cloak of a cake woman, but she little thought who she concealed. It was not till the evening that I ventured out. I ran about the streets in the moonlight. I drew myself up my full height upon the walls, which tickled my back very pleasantly. I ran here and there, looked through the highest windows in the rooms and over the roofs. I looked in and saw what nobody else could see, or indeed ought to see. In fact, it is a bad world, and I would not care to be a man, but the men are of some importance. I saw the most miserable things going on between husbands and wives, parents and children, sweet and comparable children. I have seen what no human being has the power of knowing, although they would be very glad to know the evil conduct of their neighbors. Had I written a newspaper, how eagerly it would have been read, instead of which I wrote directly to the persons themselves, and a great alarm arose. All those in town I visited, they had so much fear of me, and yet how dearly they loved me. The professor made me a professor. The tailor gave me new clothes, and I am well provided for in that way. The overseer of the mint struck coins for me. The woman declared that I was handsome, and so I became the man you see. And now I must say, Idea, here's my card. I live in the sunny side of the street, and always stay at home in the rainy weather. And the shadow departed. This is very remarkable, said the learned man. Years passed, days and years went by, and the shadow came again. How are you going on now? He asked. Ah, said the learned man, I am writing about the truth, the beautiful, and the good, but no one cares to hear anything about it. I am quite in despair, for I take it to heart very much. That is what I never do, said the shadow. I am growing quite fat and stout, which everyone ought to be. You do not understand the world. You will make yourself ill about it. You ought to travel. I am going on a journey in the summer. Will you go with me? I should like a traveling companion. Will you travel with me? Asked my shadow. It will give me a great pleasure, and I will pay all expenses. Are you going to travel far? Asked the learned man. That is a matter of opinion, replied the shadow. At all events, a journey will do you good, and if you will be my shadow, then all your journey shall be paid. It appears to me to be very absurd, said the learned man. But it is the way of the world, replied the shadow, and always will be. Then he went away. Everything went wrong with the learned man. Sorrow and trouble pursued him, and what he said about good, the beautiful, and the true was as much as value to most people as a nutmeg would be to a cow. At length he fell ill. You really look like a shadow, people said to him, and then a cold shudder would pass over him, for he had his own thoughts on the subject. You really ought to go to get some watering place, said the shadow on his next visit. There is no other chance for you. I will take you with me. For the sake of your acquaintance, I will pay the expenses of your journey, and you shall write a description of it to amuse us by the way. I should like you to go to the watering place. My beard does not grow as it ought, which is from weakness, and I must have a beard. Now do you Be sensible and accept my proposal. We shall travel as intimate friends. And at last they started together. The shadow was the master now, and the master became the shadow. They drove together and rode and walked in company with each other, side by side, or one in front and the other behind, according to the position of the sun. The shadow always knew when it took the place of the honor, but the learned man took no notice of it, for he had a good heart, and he was exceedingly mild and friendly. One day the master said to the shadow, "We have grown up together from our childhood, and now that we may become traveling companions, shall we not drink our good fellowship and say that thee, that thou to each other?" Let's take a break. Starting to get tongue tied. Alright, let's try to find where we left off at. "What you say is very straightforward and kindly meant," said the shadow, who was now really the master. "I will be equally kind and straightforward. You are a learned man and know how wonderful human nature is. There are some men who cannot endure the smell of brown paper. It makes them ill. Others will feel a shuddering sensation to their very marrow if a nail is scratched on the pane of a glass. I myself have a similar kind of feeling when I hear anyone say thou to me, I feel crushed by it, as I used to feel in my former position with you. You will perceive that in the matter of feeling, not pride, I cannot allow you to say, thou to me. I will gladly say it to you, and therefore you wish to be half fulfilled. Then the shadow addressed him, former master, as thou. It is going to rather too far, said the latter, that I am to say when I speak to him, and he is to say to me. However, he was obliged to submit. They arrived at the length at the baths, where there were many strangers, and among them a beautiful princess, whose real disease consisted in being too sharp-sighted, which made everyone very uneasy. She saw at once that the newcomer was very different to everyone else. They say he is to make his beard grow, she thought. But I know the real cause. He is unable to cast a shadow. Then she became very curious on the matter, and one day, while in the promenade, she entered in the conversation with a strange gentleman. Being a princess, she was not obliged to stand upon the ceremony. She was said to him with a hesitation, your illness consists of not being able to cast a shadow. Your Royal Highness must be on a high road to recovery from your illness. And said he, I know your complaint arose from being too sharp-sighted. And in the case, it has entirely failed. I have happened to have a most unusual shadow. Have you seen a person who it always made my side? Perhaps often give their servants finer cloth for their liveries than for their own clothes. And so I have dressed out my shadow like a man. Nay, you may observe that I have been giving him a shadow of his own. It is rather expensive, but I like to have things about me that are peculiar. How is this? Thought the princess. Am I really cured? This must be the best watering place in existence. Water in our times has certainly wonderful power, but I'll not leave this place yet, just as it begins to be amusing. The foreign prince, for he must be a prince, please me above all things. I only hope his beard won't grow, or he will leave at once. In the evening, the princess and the shadow danced together in the large assembly rooms. She was light, but she was lighter still, and she had never seen such a dancer before. She told him from the country she had come, and found he knew it had been there, but not while she was at home. He had looked into the window of her father's palace, both the upper and the lower windows. He had seen many things, and could not therefore answer the princess, and make all allusions with quite astonish her. She thought he must be the cleverest man in the world, and felt the greatest respect for his knowledge. When she danced with him again, she fell in love with him, with the shadow quickly discovered, for she had with her eyes locked looked him through and through. They danced once more, and she was nearly telling him, but she had some discretion. She thought of her only country, her kingdom, and the number of people over whom she would one day have to rule. He is a clever man, she thought to herself, which is a good thing, and dances admirably, which is also good, but has a well-grounded knowledge. This is an important question, and I must try him. Then she asked him of the most difficult question. She herself could not have answered it, and the shadow made a most unaccountable grimace. You cannot answer that, said the princess. I learned something about it in my childhood, he replied, and believe that even my very shadow standing over there by the door can answer it. Your shadow? Said the princess. Indeed, that would be very remarkable. I do not say so positively, observed the shadow, but I am inclined to believe that you can do so. He has followed me for many years, and has heard so much from me, that I think it is very likely, but your Royal Highness must allow me to observe that he is very proud of being considered a man, and to put him in a good humor so that he may answer correctly, he must be treated as a man. I shall be very pleased to do so, said the princess. So she walked up to the learned man who stood in the doorway and spoke to him in the sun, in the moon, in the green forest, and of the people near the home of the far off. And learned the man conversed with her pleasantly and sensibly. What a wonderful man he must be to have such clever shadow, thought she. If I were to choose him, it would be a real blessing to my country and my subjects, and I will do it. So the princess and the shadow were soon engaged to each other. But no one was to be told a word about it till she returned to her kingdom. No one shall know, said the shadows, not even my own shadow, and he had very peculiar reasons for saying so. After a time, the princess returned to the land over which she reigned, and the shadow accompanied her. Listen, my friend, said the shadow to the learned man. Now that I am as fortunate and more powerful as many men could be, I will do something unusually good for you. You shall live in my palace, drive with me in the royal carriage, and have $100,000 a year. But you must allow everyone to call you a shadow, and never venture to say that you have been a man. And once a year, when I sit in my balcony in the sunshine, you must lie at my feet as becomes a shadow to do. For I must tell you, I am doing to marry the princess, and our wedding will take place this evening. Now, really, this is too ridiculous, said the learned man. I cannot and will not submit to such a folly. It will be cheating the whole country, and the princess also. I will disclose everything and say that I am the man, and that you are only the shadow dressed up in my man's clothes. No one could believe you, said the shadow. Be reasonable now, or I will call the guards. I will go straight to the princess, said the learned man. But I shall be first, replied the shadow, and you will be sent to prison. And so it turned out the guards really obeyed him, as they knew he was going to marry the king's daughter. You tremble, said the princess, when the shadow appeared before her. Has anything changed? You must not be ill today, for this evening our wedding will take place. I have gone through the most terrible affair that could possibly happen, said the shadow. Only imagine, my shadow has gone mad. I suppose such a poor, shallow brain could not bear much. He fancied that he has become a real man, and that I am his shadow. How very terrible, cried the princess as he looked up. Oh yes, certainly, for I fear he will never recover. Poor shadow, said the princess. It is very unfortunate for him. It would really be a good deed to free him from his frail existence. And indeed, when I think how often people take the part of the lower class against the higher in these days, it would be the policy to put him out of the way quietly. It is certainly rather hard upon him, for he was faithful servant, said the shadow, and he pretended to sigh. You're a noble character, said the princess, and bowed herself before him. In the evening, the whole town was illuminated, and the cannons fired. Boom! And the cannons fired. Boom! And then the soldiers presented arms, and it was indeed a grand wedding. The princess and the shadow stepped out on the balcony to show themselves, and to receive one cheer more. But the learned man heard nothing of all these festivities, for he had already been executed.